Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Carle, and I am the science director at Oikonos Ecosystem Knowledge. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Phalarope movements. So the title of my talk is Salty Connections, Tracking a Phalarope Reveals Links Between Salt Lake Staging Habitats and the Pacific Ocean. And I want to give a shout out to my co-authors from Oikonos, the Mono Lake Committee, and the University of Connecticut. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's that Phalaropes are dependent on saline lakes, both red-necked and Wilson's phalaropes. They stop there during their migration where they're going to fatten up and get ready for their subsequent migration further south. Saline lakes are very important, but what is one? Um, they tend to be very high in salt content, and also they can be very alkaline and have a high pH. And they are terminal lakes, so that means the water is flowing in, but there's no place for it to go, just like the ocean. So water evaporates, it leaves the salts behind, and often these lakes become too salty for fish, which means that there's specialized extremophile invertebrates that live in them that are delicious prey for phalaropes and other birds. So Mono Lake is located in California, east of the Sierra Nevada, and it is 2.5 times saltier than the ocean. The water is running down from the snowpack of the Sierra. It has nowhere to go, and the salts stay in the lake. It's also full of alkali flies and brine shrimp, which are the preferred prey of our phalaropes. So the red-necked phalarope is a shorebird that is kind of a seabird because it spends a lot of its life in the ocean. They breed in the Arctic in the red zone of this map, and they migrate along the coasts in the yellow zone and also through the interior of Western North America where you see that yellow blob. And that's where they're stopping at the salt lakes. Their non-breeding range is the blue area down off of South America, which is an area that's quite remote and hard to study, but you might think of the Galapagos Islands as a place where you might find them. The Wilson's phalarope is a much more terrestrial bird. It's breeding in interior wetlands, but further south than rednecked. They also stage at the salt lakes, and they are flying 5,000 miles or so down to South America, where they also will go to salt lakes. And I just want to mention that they're being considered for a threatened listing under the Endangered Species Act, mainly because of really important threats to lakes like Great Salt Lake and other salt lakes. And I'll just briefly touch on the fact that saline lakes are globally threatened. Great Salt Lake is the biggest, most news-making one right now, and it has been drying up over time. It's still, we really haven't solved this problem. This is a very important site for the Phalarope species I'm talking about. As is Mono Lake, where I'm working, and just briefly, this poll illustrates where the water level is supposed to be legally mandated for Mono Lake, but because of continuing water diversions, the lake is still much lower than that at the height of the pole. So this is a familiar story for all saline lakes around the world, really. And that's just some context of why we're studying them. We're worried about their salt lake habitat, but they're also marine birds, especially in the case of the red-necked phalarope. We don't know a lot about their movements, especially what are their exact migratory routes. For the case of the rednecked, can they choose to go to the desert lakes or the ocean in a different year? And which individuals go to the salt lakes, we don't really know. We also don't know how long they stop at salt lakes, and that has major implications for population numbers and interpreting surveys at salt lakes, and tagging can help us understand that too. So we're tracking these birds with MODIS tags, which are very, very tiny tags, and they're picked up by external receivers on the landscape called MODIS receivers. And just where this map is showing the dots where there are MODIS receivers, you can see coverage is really pretty good in North America, pretty scanty in South America, and non-existent in the wintering zone of the red-necked phalarope. But there's still a lot to learn for the movements of phalaropes where there are towers. So the first challenge with this idea and this project was how to catch a phalarope at a salt lake, which is big and open, and there's no point that like a nest that the phalarope's being attracted to. So we tried chasing them around from a boat with a hand net during the day. This actually did work in the past for other folks, but it did not work for us. But when we tried it at night using the spotlighting method that a lot of people use for seabirds, where you disorient the bird with the light and then scoop it up with a net, that method worked after a lot of ado. But this picture also shows the tag that has a little solar panel on it and is the size that it's a very small tag that we just glued to the bird's back for this case. We also caught a lot of juvenile birds, which it seemed like they probably were just not quite as savvy as the adults and were a little easier to catch for us. So a little history of our efforts at Mono Lake to catch and not catch phalaropes. In 2023, we worked a long time and trying to catch Wilsons, and we ended up catching a couple of rednecked and didn't tag them. And we've managed in the last 2 years to catch 5 Wilsons and 7 rednecked phalaropes, and kind of had a breakthrough catching them last year. So moving to results from the tagging, I'm going to focus on rednecked phalaropes here. This is a nice illustrative example of some of the tracks that we got from Mono Lake. So this bird here was tagged July 29th last year at Mono Lake. And I'm going to walk through its movements a little bit about the details of what it did. So it left Mono Lake around 9 p.m. after having hung out there for a few days after we tagged it on August 2nd. In just 2 hours, it had flown over the Sierra Nevada and was located in the Central Valley of California, and it appeared to go south from there. And then around 4 p.m. the next day, it was on the California coast. Pretty rapid journey to the ocean. And then it spends one day in the Southern California Bight around the Channel Islands, gets picked up by a lot of different receivers there as it moves through. And then in just 12 hours later, it was at the Salton Sea back in interior California. And that bird actually lingered at the Salton Sea until September. So for a good month there. And it's interesting, this bird didn't just fly from Mono Lake to the Salton Sea, it went through the ocean route to get there. Another red-necked phalarope tagged at the same time did something similar where it cruised down to the Southern California Bight, but then it kept going and was picked up in coastal Mexico at Guerrero Negro at a wetland in Baja California, and then presumably went out into the ocean from there. One last example of a redneck phalarope. This one, similar story, same time, also was picked up in the Southern California Bight in less than a day, but it went down the eastern side of the Sierra to get there and not the Central Valley. And then again, it cuts back inland after spending not very long in the ocean. It cuts back inland to the Colorado River Delta, back to basically interior wetland. So I did promise I would talk about Wilson's phalaropes too. Here's one track that's kind of illustrative of what we've seen from birds tagged in Mono Lake and other parts of California. And this bird is leaving Mono Lake and going east and going through the southwest deserts of the United States, Arizona, New Mexico, and then down into northern continental Mexico. And that's pretty similar to the general pattern we've been seeing from birds tagged in Mono Lake and other sites in California. So zooming out to the big picture of how the total data we have of tagging these birds using MODIS tags in the Americas. If you look at the left panel, we have the red-necked phalarope. All the points you see there in Southern California, that's all what I just showed you from our work. And you can see there's just a handful of other birds that have been tagged on nesting grounds that have been tagged previously. So there's a lot to learn about red-necked phalaropes. And the Wilson's phalaropes there, just in the last 3 years or so, all these tracks have been recorded. And there was really no tracking before that. But you can see there's patterns emerging from tracking them in Canada and Argentina and other places. And the purple lines are showing that pattern I described of them cruising through the southwestern US and Mexico before jumping the ocean, perhaps to get to South America. So for some takeaways here, I just want to really underscore that we would not have been able to tell this story without the MODIS towers that are on the Channel Islands and in Southern California. And those were installed by USGS and BOEM to tag other seabirds. So that's huge. So if you're thinking of installing MODIS towers, please do it. It really helps in unexpected ways. Also, the Mono Lake Committee installed MODIS towers at Mono Lake. And clearly, even with the limited data we had, all the birds that left Mono Lake that we got tracks from, there was about six. There were six that I think left the lake and that we actually got return data from. And they all went to the Southern California Bight in less than a day after leaving Mono Lake. So that seems to be an important route for them. So some takeaways continuing here. We have marine bird species that are depending on the health of these inland saline lakes, and there's a linkage there between these two habitats. It's also is interesting that the redneck phalaropes are cutting to the ocean from the Salt Lake and then going sometimes back to salt lakes like the Salton Sea back inland. And basically, this is all quite new and small sample sizes. There's still a lot to learn about phalarope movements. If you're interested in working with us or collaborating on tagging phalaropes, then we need your help. And I just want to plug that the International Phalarope Working Group exists and that we would love to have more members if you're interested in this topic. And that there's been tagging, especially of Wilson's phalaropes going on in Canada, Great Salt Lake, Argentina, and that this has been a really lovely group of people that have been working together to make this happen. And that here's a picture of us, a crew of us trying to catch phalaropes unsuccessfully at Mono Lake, but having a good time. And I want to thank our partners and our funders that made all this happen, especially all the individuals that have helped donate to this project. And I just want to end by saying, please reach out if you're interested in connecting. And this QR code links to the real-time results you can see on the MODIS webpage. And you can also see our reports on the oikonos.org website. So thank you very much.